The transport ship descended through Earth's atmosphere with the quiet efficiency that marked all Terran military operations in 2387. Inside the cramped passenger bay, Master Sergeant Jake Morrison watched the blue marble of his homeworld grow larger through the small porthole. After 18 months fighting the Vex insurgency on Kepler 442b, Earth looked impossibly green and peaceful. "Still can't believe they're pulling us back for this," muttered Corporal Elena Vasquez from the seat across from him. She adjusted the straps of her combat harness, a nervous habit that Morrison had noticed developing during their last deployment. "We're supposed to be hunting down Vex sleeper cells, not babysitting some ceremonial guard." Morrison nodded but kept his thoughts to himself. The orders had been unusual, even by Ranger standards. Report to Arlington National Cemetery for assessment and evaluation of ceremonial personnel for potential special operations recruitment. It sounded like bureaucratic nonsense, but orders were orders. Besides, after the hell they'd been through on Kepler, a few days on Earth evaluating dress uniforms and parade marching didn't sound terrible. The team consisted of Morrison's usual squad. Vasquez was their demolitions expert, a compact woman from New Mexico who could make anything explode with frightening precision. Sergeant Tommy Chen handled communications and electronic warfare, his cybernetic implants glowing softly blue beneath his shaved scalp. Private First Class Marcus Johnson was their sniper, a lanky kid from Alabama who could put a round through a target at 2 kilometers in a crosswind. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos rounded out the group as their medic and close-quarters combat specialist. They'd been together for 3 years, through the initial Vex contact, the failed peace negotiations, and the bloody campaign that followed. They knew each other's moves, trusted each other's instincts, and had seen enough combat to last several lifetimes. Whatever this assignment was really about, Morrison figured they could handle it. The shuttle touched down at Joint Base Andrews with barely a bump. As they disembarked, Morrison felt the familiar weight of Earth's gravity settling into his bones. After months in the lighter gravity of Kepler 442b, everything felt heavier, more substantial. The air tasted different too, clean and sweet after breathing recycled atmosphere for so long. A young lieutenant met them at the landing pad, crisp and nervous in his dress blues. "Master Sergeant Morrison? I'm Lieutenant Davidson. I'll be escorting you to Arlington." The ride through the Virginia countryside was quiet. Morrison watched the familiar landmarks roll past, noting how little had changed despite the war. The suburbs still sprawled in their ordered patterns. The highways still carried their steady streams of traffic. It was hard to believe that humanity was locked in a desperate struggle for survival against an alien species that viewed them as nothing more than an infestation to be eliminated. Arlington National Cemetery appeared ahead of them, its white headstones marching in perfect rows across the rolling hills. Morrison had been here once before as a young soldier attending a friend's funeral. The place still had the same effect on him, a combination of profound sadness and fierce pride that made his chest tight. They were met at the visitor center by Colonel Rebecca Walsh, a trim woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much combat. Morrison recognized her type immediately, a warrior who'd been forced to trade her rifle for a desk but hadn't forgotten how to use either. "Rangers," she said, returning their salutes. "Thank you for coming. I know this assignment seems unusual, but I assure you it's important. We're evaluating personnel for a special mission, something that requires absolute dedication, unwavering focus, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure." "With respect, ma'am," Vasquez said. "Ceremonial guards aren't exactly known for their combat effectiveness." Walsh smiled, but there was something sharp in it. "That's exactly what we're here to determine, Corporal. The mission parameters are classified, but I can tell you this. We need someone who can stand perfectly still for hours, who won't break under psychological pressure, and who has the discipline to follow orders without question, even when everything around them is falling apart." Morrison frowned. "That sounds more like an intelligence operation than a combat mission." "Perhaps," Walsh said. "But the skills translate. Tell me, Sergeant, what do you know about the tomb of the unknown soldier?" "It's a memorial," Morrison replied, "guarded 24 hours a day by volunteers from the 3rd Infantry Regiment. They march back and forth, change guard every couple hours, keep watch over the tomb." "Correct. But what you might not know is the selection process. Out of hundreds of applicants, less than 20% make it through the initial screening. Of those, only about half complete the training. The guards who earn the right to walk those 21 steps are among the most disciplined soldiers in the entire military. Santos spoke up. What kind of training are we talking about, ma'am? Memorization of every name on every headstone in the cemetery, Walsh said. Perfect knowledge of military history, protocol, and honors. Physical conditioning that makes most special forces training look easy. And psychological evaluation that weeds out anyone who can't handle the pressure of knowing that millions of people are counting on them to honor the dead properly. Chen's cybernetic implants flickered as he accessed his neural database. The guards work in all weather conditions, he said. Hurricanes, blizzards, heat waves. They've never missed a single guard duty in over 80 years. Exactly, Walsh said. And that's just the beginning. The guard we're evaluating today has been walking the mat for 7 years. He's never missed a step, never broken protocol, never showed even the slightest sign of fatigue or distraction. In a few minutes, you're going to watch him perform his duties, and then you're going to test him. Morrison felt a familiar tingle of anticipation. What kind of test? Walsh's smile turned predatory. The kind that will either prove he's exactly what we need for this mission, or break him completely. Either way, we'll have our answer. The Rangers exchanged glances. Whatever this was really about, it was starting to sound a lot more interesting than a simple evaluation of ceremonial guards. Morrison had the feeling they were about to discover something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. The walk to the tomb of the unknown soldier took them through the heart of Arlington National Cemetery. Morrison found himself reading the names on the headstones as they passed, each one representing a life cut short in service to something greater than themselves. The weight of all that sacrifice pressed down on him like a physical force. The guard's name is Specialist David Park, Colonel Walsh explained as they walked, 26 years old, from Seattle. He volunteered for tomb guard duty straight out of advanced individual training. Most soldiers see it as a career killer, a dead-end assignment that keeps you from real action. Park saw it differently. They crested a small hill and the tomb came into view. Morrison had seen it in pictures and videos, but experiencing it in person was different. The white marble sarcophagus sat on a raised platform, simple and dignified, with the words, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God," carved into its face. Behind it stood a curved wall listing the names of unknown soldiers from various conflicts. But it was the figure walking slowly back and forth in front of the tomb that captured Morrison's attention. Specialist Park moved with mechanical precision, each step exactly 21 inches long, his polished black shoes clicking against the stone in perfect rhythm. His dress blue uniform was immaculate, every button gleaming, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. The bayonet fixed to his M14 rifle caught the afternoon sunlight as he executed a flawless about-face at the end of his route. 21 steps. Face the tomb for 21 seconds, about-face. 21 steps in the other direction. Face the tomb for 21 seconds, repeat. Again and again, hour after hour, in an endless cycle of vigilance. 21 steps, 21 seconds, Walsh murmured, representing the 21-gun salute, the highest military honor. He's been walking that pattern for 7 years, through rain, snow, heat waves, and hurricane-force winds. Never missed a step. Never broken the rhythm. Morrison watched Park complete another circuit. The young soldier's face was a mask of concentration, his eyes fixed straight ahead. There was something almost supernatural about his focus, as if the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist for him. Impressive discipline, Vasquez admitted. But how does this translate to combat operations? That's what we're here to find out, Walsh replied. She checked her watch. The changing of the guard ceremony is about to begin. You'll want to see this. A small crowd of tourists had gathered near the rope barrier that kept visitors at a respectful distance from the tomb. Morrison and his team took positions where they could observe both Park and the approaching relief guard. The ceremony was a precisely choreographed dance of military bearing and respect for the dead. The relief guard approached from the amphitheater, his movements as precise as Park's. Every step was calculated, every gesture exact. When he reached the designated spot, he began the formal inspection ritual. Morrison watched in fascination as the relief guard examined Park's rifle, uniform, and bearing with microscopic attention to detail. Any flaw, any imperfection would result in the relief being rejected and sent back to prepare again. Park stood at attention throughout the inspection, his breathing so controlled that his chest barely moved. Morrison had seen Special Forces operators with less composure under enemy fire. The rifle inspection alone took 10 minutes, with the relief guard examining every surface of the weapon, testing its operation, ensuring that it met the impossibly high standards required for tomb guard duty. Finally, the relief guard was satisfied. The formal exchange of duties began, a ritual as old as the tomb itself. Park saluted the tomb, performed a perfect about-face, and began his measured march toward the guard's quarters. His duty shift was complete, but Morrison noticed that his pace never varied, his bearing never relaxed until he disappeared from view. 7 years, Santos said quietly. 7 years of that routine, day after day. Actually, Walsh corrected, it's more than that. When he's not walking the mat, he's studying, learning the names and details of every person buried in this cemetery, memorizing military history, protocol, honors, and awards, maintaining his equipment to standards that make parade inspection look casual. The tomb guards live this commitment 24 hours a day. Chen's implants flickered as he ran calculations. The psychological stress must be enormous. The pressure of knowing that any mistake, any momentary lapse in concentration, dishonors the memory of every unknown soldier. Exactly, Walsh said. And that's just the beginning. Park has faced down protesters who tried to storm the tomb during anti-war demonstrations. He's maintained his post during terrorist threats, natural disasters, and civil unrest. Through it all, he's never wavered. Morrison felt a growing respect for the young specialist. He'd served with some of the toughest soldiers in the galaxy. But there was something uniquely impressive about Park's dedication. It took a different kind of courage to face the same challenge every day for years, knowing that the slightest failure would be a betrayal of trust. "What's the real mission, Colonel?" he asked. "Why do you need someone with these specific skills?" Walsh's expression grew serious. "The Vex have developed a new weapon. Intelligence suggests it's some kind of psychological warfare device designed to break human will and concentration. Early reports indicate that it can cause hallucinations, disorientation, and complete loss of focus in most personnel within minutes of exposure." The pieces began falling into place for Morrison. "You need someone who can resist psychological attack." "More than that," Walsh replied. "We need someone who can maintain absolute focus and discipline, even when their mind is under direct assault. Someone who's proven they can ignore distractions, overcome discomfort, and perform their duty, regardless of external conditions." Vasquez frowned. "You're talking about using a ceremonial guard in a combat situation against alien technology?" "I'm talking about using the most psychologically disciplined soldier in the entire military," Walsh corrected. "Park doesn't just guard a tomb. He guards the concept of honor itself. He's proven he can maintain focus under conditions that would break most people. The question is whether those skills translate to active resistance against Vex mind weapons." Morrison looked back toward the tomb, where the new guard had taken up Park's position and begun the eternal march. 21 steps. 21 seconds. "Repeat forever, so we test him," he said. "See if his discipline holds up under combat conditions." Walsh nodded. "Tomorrow morning you put Specialist Park through every stress test you can think of. Physical, psychological, tactical, find his breaking point. And if he doesn't have one," Santos asked, "then we may have found the one person who can complete this mission and come home alive." The briefing room at Fort Myer was sterile and windowless, the kind of place where classified conversations happened behind reinforced walls and electronic scramblers. Morrison sat with his team around a conference table, studying the classified files that Colonel Walsh had provided about the Vex psychological weapons program. "This is disturbing," Chen said, his cybernetic implants casting blue shadows across the classified reports scattered before him. "The Vex weapon doesn't just attack the mind, it rewrites fundamental neural pathways. Subjects exposed to it for more than 15 minutes show permanent changes in brain structure." Vasquez leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "The test subjects they captured on Kepler 442b, what happened to them exactly?" Morrison read from the report, his voice grim. "Complete loss of focus within 3 minutes. Hallucinations, disorientation, inability to complete simple tasks. Most subjects began attacking their own teammates within 10 minutes. After 15 minutes of exposure, the effects became permanent. They're still in psychiatric facilities back on Earth." "And Command thinks one ceremonial guard can resist this?" Johnson asked skeptically. "No offense to the guy's dedication, but we're talking about alien mind control technology. Santos flipped through medical scans from the affected soldiers. Look at these brain patterns. The Vex weapon specifically targets areas responsible for concentration, discipline, and goal-oriented behavior. It's like it was designed to break exactly the kind of mental conditioning that makes good soldiers. Which is why Park might be our answer, Morrison said. 7 years of absolute mental discipline. 7 years of maintaining focus despite distractions, discomfort, and psychological pressure. His brain has been conditioned in ways that normal military training can't match. The door opened and Specialist David Park entered, still in his immaculate dress uniform. Up close, Morrison could see the man's true youth, but there was something ageless in his eyes, a depth that spoke of years spent in contemplation of duty and sacrifice. Specialist Park reporting as ordered. Sir, he said, snapping to attention. At ease. Specialist, Morrison replied. Have a seat. We need to talk. Park settled into the offered chair with the same measured precision he brought to everything else. His posture remained perfect, his attention focused completely on Morrison, despite the presence of the other Rangers and the classified materials scattered across the table. Colonel Walsh has briefed. You on the general nature of this evaluation? Morrison asked. Yes, sir. I understand that my skills are being assessed for a classified mission involving resistance to enemy psychological warfare techniques. Vasquez leaned forward. Park, can I ask you something? Why did you volunteer for tomb guard duty? Most soldiers see it as career suicide. For the first time, Park's expression softened slightly. My grandfather served in Vietnam, ma'am. He came home, but a lot of his friends didn't. Some of them were never identified, never properly honored. When I learned about the tomb of the unknown soldier, I knew that's where I belonged. Someone needs to stand watch for those who can't stand watch for themselves. The simple sincerity of the statement hit Morrison harder than he'd expected. In his years as a ranger, he'd served with heroes and cowards, saints and killers. But there was something pure about Park's motivation that reminded him why he joined the military in the first place. The mission we're considering you for, Chen said carefully, it involves significant personal risk. The weapon we're dealing with has caused permanent psychological damage to every soldier who's faced it so far. Park's expression didn't change. Sir, I've spent 7 years preparing to die for my duty if necessary. The location of that death doesn't change the commitment. Johnson whistled softly. You really mean that, don't you? Yes, sir. Every day I walk the mat, I make peace with the possibility that today might be my last. It's the only way to maintain proper focus. Morrison felt a chill of recognition. He'd seen that same acceptance of mortality in veteran Special Forces operators. But those men had earned it through combat. Park had achieved it through pure mental discipline. The tests we're going to put you through tomorrow, Santos said. They're designed to find your breaking point. Physical stress, psychological pressure, simulated combat conditions. We need to know exactly how much you can endure before your focus breaks. I understand, ma'am. Some of these tests might seem designed to humiliate you or break down your military bearing, Morrison added. They're not personal attacks. We need to know if your discipline can survive direct challenges to your sense of duty and honor. Park nodded. Sir, with respect, people have been trying to break my focus for 7 years. Protesters, hecklers, weather, equipment failures, personal problems. I've learned to treat external challenges as just another form of weather to be endured. Vasquez exchanged a glance with Morrison. What do you mean by that? When you're standing guard in a hurricane, ma'am, you can't fight the wind. You can't negotiate with it or reason with it. You can only maintain your position and wait for it to pass. I've learned to treat all distractions the same way. They're just weather. The room fell silent as the Rangers absorbed this philosophy. Morrison had trained with meditation masters and Zen warriors, but he'd never heard the concept of mental discipline explained so simply or powerfully. There's something else you should know, Morrison said finally. The mission, if you're selected, involves working alone. No backup, no support team. Just you and the alien weapon. I'm used to working alone, sir. On the mat, it's just me and the tomb. Everything else is external. Chen's implants flickered as he accessed tactical databases. Specialist, have you ever been in actual combat? No, sir. Unless you count the time protesters tried to storm the tomb during the anti-war demonstrations last year. What happened then? Santos asked. Park's expression remained neutral. I maintained my position, ma'am. Capitol Police handled the protesters. My job was to guard the tomb, not to engage in crowd control. Even when they were shouting at you personally? Calling you names, questioning your intelligence, your manhood? Yes, ma'am. They were just weather. Morrison stood and walked to the window, looking out at the cemetery where thousands of white headstones marched in perfect rows. Park, I have to ask. Don't you ever get angry? Frustrated? Don't you ever want to just walk away from all that pressure and responsibility? Park was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Sir, every person buried in that cemetery gave up everything for the idea that some things are worth dying for. They gave up their futures, their families, their dreams. The least I can do is give up my comfort, my convenience, and my personal desires to honor their sacrifice. Anger and frustration are luxuries I can't afford. The Rangers sat in stunned silence. Morrison had served with Congressional Medal of Honor winners who had less apparent dedication to duty than this young specialist who'd never fired a shot in anger. Tomorrow morning, for 600 hours, Morrison said finally. We're going to put you through hell, specialist. Are you ready for that? Park stood and came to attention. Sir, I've been ready for 7 years. The testing facility at Quantico looked like something from a science fiction movie. Morrison led his team through sterile corridors lined with observation windows and reinforced doors, each room designed to subject human beings to precisely calibrated forms of stress and discomfort. Colonel Walsh walked beside them, her expression unreadable as she reviewed the testing protocols on her tablet. We'll start with basic physical stress tests, she explained. Temperature extremes, noise, vibration, sleep deprivation. Then move on to psychological pressure, simulated combat conditions, and finally, exposure to prototype versions of the Vex mind weapon. Specialist Park walked behind them in standard battle dress uniform, his bearing as perfect as ever despite the early hour. Morrison had watched him arrive at 5:30, 30 minutes before the required time, and spend the extra time in what appeared to be meditation. Has he been briefed on what to expect? Santos asked quietly. Basic outline only, Walsh replied. We need genuine reactions, not rehearsed responses. They entered the first testing chamber, a stark white room with cameras in every corner and sensors embedded in the walls. A single chair sat in the center under bright lights that could be adjusted from barely visible to blindingly intense. Specialist Park, Morrison said. Please take a seat. For the next 4 hours, you'll be subjected to various forms of sensory stress. Temperature changes, noise, light variations, vibration. Your job is to maintain focus and composure regardless of conditions. Park settled into the chair with his usual precision. What should I focus on, sir? Morrison pulled out a military manual and opened it to a random page. Memorize this section on field sanitation procedures. At the end of the test, you'll recite it word for word. Yes, sir. Park studied the page for exactly 2 minutes, then nodded to indicate he was ready. Morrison closed the manual and signaled to the technicians in the observation booth. The test began. The temperature dropped first, plummeting from comfortable room temperature to just above freezing. Park's breath became visible in white puffs, but his posture never changed. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, his breathing controlled and even. Vasquez watched through the observation window, shaking her head in amazement. Most people would be shivering uncontrollably by now. He's used to weather extremes, Walsh noted. Tomb guards work in all conditions. I've seen them maintain their posts in sub-zero temperatures and 100-degree heat. The temperature suddenly spiked to over 90 degrees. Sweat began to bead on Park's forehead, but he didn't move to wipe it away. His uniform darkened with perspiration, but his breathing remained steady. Chen monitored the biometric readings from Park's sensors. Heart rate is elevated but stable. Brain activity shows no signs of distress or distraction. It's like he's actively ignoring the discomfort. Next came the noise. Speakers hidden in the walls began broadcasting a cacophony of sounds designed to shatter concentration. Gunfire, explosions, screaming voices, fingernails on chalkboard, random electronic squeals and static. The volume increased gradually until normal conversation would have been impossible. Park's expression never changed. If anything, he seemed to become more focused, as if the noise was helping him concentrate rather than hindering it. Incredible, Johnson muttered. That noise would drive me crazy in 5 minutes. He told us yesterday, Morrison reminded them. External challenges are just weather to be endured. The chair began to vibrate subtly at first, then with increasing intensity. The entire room seemed to shake as powerful motors subjected Park to the kind of turbulence that would normally require restraints. Still, he sat perfectly upright, his focus unbroken. How is he doing that? Santos wondered aloud. The human body isn't designed to maintain balance under those conditions. 7 years of standing at attention for hours at a time, Walsh explained. His muscle memory and proprioception are probably enhanced beyond normal human parameters. 2 hours into the test, the technicians began combining stressors. Extreme cold with blinding lights, deafening noise with violent vibration, temperature swings that would have most people vomiting from the shock to their nervous systems. Park endured it all with the same unwavering composure he brought to his duties at the tomb. His only concession to the stress was a slight tightening around his eyes, so subtle that Morrison might have missed it if he hadn't been watching so carefully. "This is unreal," Vasquez said. "I've seen Special Forces operators break under less pressure than this." "Different kind of conditioning," Morrison replied. "We train for action under stress. He's trained for absolute stillness under stress. It might actually be harder." The third hour brought psychological elements into the mix. Speakers began broadcasting recordings designed to provoke emotional responses, his own voice somehow synthesized, declaring that his duty was meaningless and his sacrifices worthless. Fake news reports claiming that Arlington National Cemetery was being converted into a shopping mall. Audio of his family members supposedly criticizing his life choices. For the first time, Park's jaw tightened slightly. But his posture remained perfect, his gaze steady. "The personal attacks are getting to him," Chen observed, studying the biometric data. "Stress hormones are spiking." "But look at his behavior," Santos pointed out. "He's processing the emotional stress without letting it affect his physical control." The final hour combined everything. Extreme temperature swings, painful noise, violent vibration, and increasingly personal psychological attacks. The speakers now broadcast audio that seemed to come from his deceased grandfather, the Vietnam veteran who had inspired Park's service, telling him he was a disappointment and a failure. Morrison saw Park's hands clench into fists for just a moment before relaxing again. It was the first crack in his composure they'd witnessed. "End the test," Morrison ordered. The room fell silent and returned to normal temperature. Park sat in the sudden quiet, sweat-soaked and breathing heavily but still upright and alert. "Specialist Park," Morrison said, entering the chamber. "Please recite the field sanitation procedures you memorized." Without hesitation, Park began to speak. His voice was hoarse from the hours of abuse, but every word was correct, every detail perfect. He recited the entire section flawlessly, including subsection numbers and footnote references. "Outstanding," Walsh said as they left the chamber. 4 hours of intensive stress and his memory retention was perfect. "The emotional attacks worried me," Santos admitted. "He showed some response to those, but he didn't break," Morrison pointed out. "He processed the stress and continued functioning. That's exactly what we need against the Vex weapon." Park walked beside them, his uniform soaked with sweat but his bearing still military perfect. "What's next, sir?" Morrison checked the schedule. "Combat simulation. We're going to put you in a firefight and see how you handle tactical pressure." "Will I be armed, sir?" "Yes, but your primary objective won't be to fight. It'll be to maintain focus on a specific task while combat rages around you." Park nodded. "I understand, sir." As they walked toward the combat simulation facility, Morrison found himself genuinely impressed. He'd put elite Special Forces operators through similar tests, and many of them had broken before completing the full sequence. Park had endured it all without losing focus on his assigned task, but the real tests were still ahead. Physical discomfort was one thing. Active combat was another. And if Park could handle both, then they'd find out if his mental discipline could stand against alien technology designed specifically to shatter human will. The corridor ahead led to a chamber that would simulate the chaos and terror of battlefield conditions. Morrison hoped that Park's 7 years of standing watch over the dead had prepared him for the violence of protecting the living. The combat simulation chamber was a technological marvel that could recreate any battlefield environment with frightening realism. Holographic projectors, scent generators, and haptic feedback systems combined to create experiences so authentic that even veteran soldiers sometimes forgot they were in a simulation. Morrison watched the technicians calibrate the system while Park received his briefing. The scenario was brutal but necessary. Park would be positioned in the center of an active firefight with one simple task: decode a series of encrypted messages. While enemy forces attempted to overrun his position, the messages contain time-sensitive intelligence, Colonel Walsh explained to Park. Your job is to decode them, completely and accurately, regardless of what's happening around you. You'll have backup, but their primary mission is to observe your performance, not to protect you. Park nodded, checking his equipment one final time. He'd been issued an M4 carbine, standard body armor, and a tactical radio. The encryption device looked like an oversized smartphone with a complex keyboard and multiple screens. Sir, what happens if I'm killed in the simulation? Park asked. The simulation ends, Morrison replied. But the pain, the chaos, the fear, all of that will feel completely real. Your brain won't be able to distinguish between simulation and reality once it starts. Understood, sir. Vasquez pulled Morrison aside as the final preparations were made. Jake, this feels wrong. We're about to put a ceremonial guard through Ranger-level combat training. What if we break him? Then we find out now instead of when he's facing real Vex mind weapons, Morrison replied grimly. Better to break him in simulation than get him killed in the field. The simulation chamber darkened and suddenly Park was standing in the ruins of a bombed-out city. The smell of smoke and cordite filled the air. In the distance, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed off shattered buildings. Morrison and his team materialized nearby, their simulation avatars armed and ready. Incoming hostiles from multiple directions. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. Park, get to that communications bunker and start decoding. We'll try to keep them off you. Park moved with surprising efficiency through the rubble-strewn street, his movement fluid and purposeful despite his lack of combat experience. He reached the designated position, a partially collapsed building with concrete walls that would provide some protection, and immediately began working on the encryption device. The first wave of enemy soldiers appeared as Park was inputting the first coded message. Morrison watched in amazement as bullets began flying around the specialist's position, and Park never even looked up from his work. His fingers moved steadily across the device's keyboard, his concentration absolute. Contact left, Johnson shouted, opening fire on simulated enemies advancing from an alley. The sound of his rifle was deafening in the enclosed space, brass casings ringing against concrete as they hit the ground. Park continued working, his breathing steady despite the chaos erupting around him. A grenade exploded 20 meters away, showering his position with debris and filling the air with dust and smoke. He simply adjusted his position slightly to shield the encryption device and kept typing. How was he doing that? Santos demanded over the radio, pausing her own simulated firefight to stare at Park. Those explosions should be shattering his concentration. Morrison was wondering the same thing. The simulation was designed to overwhelm the senses, to create the kind of sensory overload that made complex thinking impossible. Yet Park worked with the same methodical precision he brought to his duties at the tomb. The second wave of attackers was larger and more aggressive. Simulated enemy soldiers stormed through multiple breach points, forcing the Rangers to fall back toward Park's position. The sound of gunfire became constant, punctuated by explosions and the screams of wounded soldiers. A simulated sniper's bullet cracked past Park's head, close enough that he should have felt the shockwave. He didn't even flinch. His fingers continued their steady work on the encryption device as if he were sitting in a quiet library instead of the middle of a war zone. First message decoded, Park announced calmly over the radio. Moving to the second sequence, and how many more? Morrison asked, dropping a magazine from his rifle and slamming in a fresh one. 4, sir. 4 more messages while under fire from an increasingly aggressive enemy force. Morrison began to understand why Colonel Walsh had chosen Park for this mission. His ability to compartmentalize, to separate his immediate task from external circumstances, was unlike anything Morrison had ever witnessed. The third wave brought mortars. The simulated explosions were powerful enough to shake the entire building, bringing down chunks of ceiling and filling the air with choking dust. A normal person would have been driven to cover, seeking shelter from the bombardment. Park adjusted his position to protect the encryption device from falling debris and continued working. This is impossible, Vasquez muttered, firing at advancing enemies while keeping one eye on Park. No one has that kind of focus under fire. He's not focusing, Chen realized suddenly. He's doing the opposite. He's actively unfocusing on everything except his assigned task. Morrison understood what Chen meant. Most soldiers tried to maintain awareness of everything happening around them during combat. Park had somehow trained himself to selectively filter out everything that wasn't directly relevant to his mission. The gunfire, explosions, and chaos were just weather to be endured. Second message complete, Park announced. Beginning third sequence. A simulated enemy soldier broke through their defensive line and charged directly at Park's position, bayonet fixed and screaming. Morrison started to shift his fire to intercept, but stopped when he realized that Park had smoothly drawn his sidearm without looking up from the encryption device. Still typing with his left hand, Park put 3 round center mass into the attacking soldier with his right, then holstered the weapon and resumed his two-handed typing. "Did you see that?" Santos breathed over the radio. He never stopped working on the decoder. The simulation escalated further. Chemical weapons filled the air with burning gas. Artillery strikes shook the building to its foundations. Enemy forces pressed their attack from every direction, forcing the Rangers into an increasingly desperate defensive fight. Through it all, Park worked with mechanical precision. His movements had taken on an almost robotic quality, as if he had become an extension of the encryption device itself. When enemy soldiers got too close, he would eliminate them with minimum necessary force, then immediately return to his primary task. Fourth message decoded, he reported. Final sequence in progress. Morrison found himself in a strange position. He was supposed to be testing Park's limits, but instead he was being educated in the nature of absolute dedication. Every soldier talked about mission focus, but Park was demonstrating what it actually looked like when pushed to its logical extreme. The final assault was overwhelming. Dozens of enemy soldiers poured into the building from every direction. The Rangers were forced into a fighting retreat, their ammunition running low, their options disappearing. The simulation was designed to end in their defeat, testing how Park would handle mission failure and the prospect of death. "I'm hit," Johnson called out, his avatar stumbling as simulated blood began spreading across his uniform. "We're being overrun," Vasquez reported. "Park, we need to extract now." "Negative," Park replied calmly, still working on the device. Mission incomplete. Enemy soldiers were now less than 10 meters away, advancing through the smoke and chaos toward Park's position. Morrison could see muzzle flashes from their weapons, could hear their shouts as they closed for the kill. Final message decoded, Park announced just as the first enemy soldier rounded the corner toward his position. Mission complete. The simulation ended abruptly, leaving them standing in the empty chamber once again. Park calmly powered down the encryption device and came to attention. "All 4 messages successfully decoded, sir," he reported to Morrison. "Intelligence package ready for transmission." The Rangers stood in stunned silence. They'd just witnessed something that should have been impossible. A single soldier maintaining perfect mission focus while under the most intense combat pressure the simulation could generate. "Outstanding. Specialist," Colonel Walsh said, entering the chamber. "How do you feel?" "Ready for the next test, ma'am." Morrison looked at his team, seeing his own amazement reflected in their faces. If Park could handle simulated combat with that level of composure, maybe, just maybe, he could handle whatever the Vex had developed. But the real test was still ahead. The prototype Vex mind weapon was waiting in the next chamber, and no amount of conventional training could prepare someone for alien technology designed to attack the human psyche itself. The laboratory housing the prototype Vex mind weapon looked more like a medical facility than a weapons testing range. White walls, sterile surfaces, and banks of monitoring equipment surrounded a central chamber that was sealed behind reinforced transparent aluminum. Warning signs in multiple languages covered every surface, and the air itself seemed to hum with barely contained energy. Dr. Sarah Kim, the project's lead scientist, met them at the entrance with barely concealed anxiety. "Colonel Walsh, I have to protest this test one more time. We've never exposed a human subject to the weapon for more than 5 minutes, and even that caused significant psychological trauma." "How significant?" Morrison asked, studying the test chamber through the observation window. "Subject experienced complete dissociation, hallucinations, and temporary loss of motor control," Dr. Kim replied. "Full recovery took 6 weeks of intensive therapy. We're talking about alien technology that specifically targets human neural architecture. It's not something you can train to resist." Colonel Walsh checked her tablet, reviewing the final test protocols. "Specialist Park understands the risks. The mission parameters require someone who can resist the weapon's effects for at least 15 minutes. If Park can't do it, no one can." Specialist Park stood quietly beside them, studying the chamber where he would face humanity's greatest psychological threat. His expression remained as calm as ever, but Morrison noticed that his hands were clasped behind his back in a position of formal attention, as if he were preparing to take his post at the tomb. "Specialist," Dr. Kim said, "I need you to understand what you're volunteering for. The weapon doesn't just cause discomfort or distraction. It attacks the fundamental processes that allow you to think clearly, to remember who you are, to distinguish reality from hallucination. Previous subjects have described it as having their minds torn apart from the inside." "Doctor, I appreciate the warning," Park replied, "but I've spent 7 years learning to ignore everything except my duty. If this weapon attacks my ability to think, then I'll simply stop thinking and rely on my training." Dr. Kim looked baffled. "You can't just stop thinking. Human consciousness doesn't work that way. With respect, ma'am, you haven't stood guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier for 18-hour shifts. There are levels of mental discipline that most people never explore." Morrison felt a chill of recognition. He'd seen that same transcendent calm in Zen masters and Tibetan monks, individuals who had pushed human consciousness beyond its normal limits through years of dedicated practice. But those men had trained in monasteries, not military ceremonies. "Let's review the mission parameters one more time," Colonel Walsh said. "The Vex have constructed a weapon installation on Kepler Form 42b that's protected by their mind weapon. Intelligence indicates that the device requires a 15-minute warm-up cycle before it can fire. Someone needs to penetrate their defenses, plant charges on the installation, and escape before the main weapon comes online. And the mind weapon protects it by driving anyone who gets close completely insane," Chen added, his cybernetic implants flickering as he accessed classified databases. Previous reconnaissance teams made it less than 50 meters before they started attacking each other. "The prototype in this chamber," Dr. Kim explained, "generates approximately 60% of the field strength of the actual Vex installation. If Specialist Park can resist it for 15 minutes, he should theoretically be able to complete the mission." "Theoretically," Santos muttered. "Based on alien technology we barely understand." Park turned to face the group, his bearing as perfect as if he were about to take his post at Arlington. "Permission to ask a question, sir?" "Go ahead, Specialist. If I fail this test, who's the backup plan?" The silence that followed answered his question more clearly than words could have. There was no backup plan. Park was humanity's best hope of stopping a weapon that could drive entire armies insane. "Then we'd better make sure you don't fail," Morrison said. The preparation took an hour. Park was fitted with biometric sensors that would monitor every aspect of his physiology during the test. Emergency medical equipment was positioned and tested. Protocols were established for immediate extraction if his vital signs became critical. "One more thing," Dr. Kim said as Park prepared to enter the chamber. "The weapon tends to attack personal memories and emotional attachments. It will try to use your own thoughts and feelings against you. The more important something is to you, the more violently the weapon will twist it." Park paused at the chamber entrance. "Doctor, the most important thing in my life is honoring the sacrifice of those who died serving their country. If the weapon wants to attack that, it's welcome to try." He entered the chamber and took his position in the center, a simple metal chair surrounded by the alien device's projection systems. The weapon itself was a crystalline structure about the size of a basketball, pulsing with an internal light that hurt to look at directly. "Beginning test in 30 seconds. Dr. Kim announced over the intercom. "Specialist Park, please remain seated and try to maintain focus on your assigned task." The task was simple in concept but brutally difficult in execution. Recite the names of every soldier buried in Arlington National Cemetery from memory, in alphabetical order. It was a test that would require absolute concentration and perfect recall for the entire 15-minute duration. "I'm ready, ma'am," Park replied. The weapon activated with a sound like breaking glass mixed with electronic static. The air around Park seemed to shimmer and distort, and the monitors immediately registered spikes in electromagnetic activity that made Chen's implants spark and flicker. Park began speaking immediately. "Adams Michael J., Specialist, 3rd Infantry Division, killed in action, Vietnam." His voice was steady and clear, but Morrison could see the weapon's effects beginning almost immediately. Park's pupils dilated, and his hands gripped the arms of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. "Remarkable," Dr. Kim breathed, monitoring the readings. "His brain activity is completely abnormal, but he's still functioning cognitively. On the monitors, Morrison could see what the weapon was doing to Park's mind. Neural pathways were firing randomly, memory centers were being bombarded with chaotic signals, and the areas responsible for sensory processing were going haywire. Any normal person would have been reduced to a gibbering wreck within seconds. But Park continued his recitation. Baker, William T., Sergeant, 1st Cavalry Division, killed in action, Korea, 1951. 5 minutes into the test, the weapon's assault intensified. Park's voice began to waver slightly, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the chamber. The monitors showed that his brain was essentially under siege, with massive electromagnetic interference disrupting normal neural function. How is he still talking? Vasquez wondered aloud. He's not thinking, Morrison realized. He's running on pure muscle memory and conditioning. 7 years of repetition has burned those names into his brain so deeply that he can access them even when his conscious mind is under attack. But at the 10-minute mark, something changed. Park's voice faltered for the first time, and his eyes began darting around the chamber as if seeing things that weren't there. He's starting to hallucinate, Dr. Kim reported. Neural activity is becoming increasingly chaotic. Clark Jennifer S. Lieutenant, Military Police Corps, killed in action, Iraq, 2005. Park's voice was slurring now, and his hands were shaking. Morrison could see the internal battle being fought behind Park's eyes. The weapon was attacking everything he held dear, twisting his memories of honor and service into something horrible and mocking. But somehow, impossibly, he kept reciting names. At 12 minutes, Park suddenly stopped speaking. His eyes rolled back in his head, and for a moment Morrison thought they'd lost him. Then Park spoke again, but his voice had changed, becoming mechanically precise, almost robotic. Davis, Robert A., Private 1st Class Marine Corps, killed in action, Vietnam, 1968. What just happened? Santos asked. Dr. Kim studied the readings with amazement. He's shut down his higher brain functions completely. He's operating on pure autonomic conditioning now, like a biological machine. It was the most extraordinary display of mental discipline Morrison had ever witnessed. Faced with an alien weapon designed to destroy human consciousness, Park had simply stepped outside his own mind and let his training take over. 14 minutes, Dr. Kim announced. 1 minute to go. Park's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Blood trickled from his nose and his entire body was shaking with the effort of resisting the weapon's assault. But his voice continued, steady and clear, reading names from a memory that had been burned so deeply into his mind that even alien technology couldn't erase it. 15 minutes, Dr. Kim called out.
Test complete.
Shutting down the weapon. The crystalline device powered down and Park slumped forward in his chair, unconscious but breathing. Medical technicians rushed into the chamber as Morrison and his team watched in stunned silence. Specialist David Park had just accomplished something that should have been impossible. He had resisted a Vex mind weapon for the full 15 minutes, maintaining cognitive function even when his brain was under direct assault by alien technology. The mission was possible. Humanity had found its weapon against the Vex. Specialist David Park awoke in the medical facility at Quantico 12 hours after the test. Morrison was sitting beside his bed, reading reports on a tablet when Park's eyes opened and focused on the ceiling above him. "How did I do, sir?" Park asked, his voice hoarse but clear. Morrison set down his tablet and leaned forward. "You passed, Specialist. 15 minutes of full exposure to a Vex mind weapon, and you completed your assigned task. Dr. Kim says it's the most extraordinary display of mental resistance she's ever documented." Park tried to sit up, then thought better of it, as the room spun slightly around him. "Did I get all the names right?" "Every single one," Morrison confirmed. "Even when your brain was under direct assault by alien technology, you never missed a name or got the alphabetical order wrong. How do you feel?" Park considered the question seriously. "Like I've been hit by a truck, sir, but intact. The weapon was intense, but not different from other challenges I've faced." Morrison shook his head in amazement. "Park, that weapon has caused permanent psychological damage to every other person who's been exposed to it. You treated it like just another form of weather." "In a way it was, sir. Just much more intense weather." The door opened and Colonel Walsh entered, followed by Dr. Kim and the rest of Morrison's Ranger team. Park immediately tried to come to attention despite being flat on his back. "At ease, Specialist," Walsh said. "You've earned the right to rest." She pulled up a chair beside the bed. I'll get straight to the point. The mission is approved. Command wants to know if you're willing to volunteer for the operation. Park was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. When he spoke, his voice carried the same absolute conviction Morrison had heard throughout their time together. Ma'am, I took an oath to guard the tomb of the unknown soldier for as long as I was needed. This mission is just a different way of serving the same duty. If stopping this weapon will protect others from having to face what I faced in that chamber, then I'll do it. Dr. Kim stepped forward, medical concern evident in her expression. Specialist, you should know that the actual weapon is 40% stronger than what you experienced. The exposure time could be longer, and there won't be any medical monitoring or emergency extraction protocols. I understand, ma'am. And the mission profile shows you'll be operating alone behind enemy lines, Santos added. No backup, no support, no extraction plan if things go wrong. Park smiled slightly, the first time Morrison had seen him show anything approaching humor. Ma'am, I've been standing alone with the dead for 7 years. I'm used to operating without backup. Vasquez leaned against the wall, shaking her head. You're actually looking forward to this, aren't you? No, ma'am. But I'm not afraid of it either. Fear is just another form of weather. Chen's cybernetic implants flickered as he accessed mission databases. The target facility is protected by automated defenses in addition to the mind weapon. Combat drones, energy barriers, the full range of Vex technology. Even if you can resist the psychological weapon, the physical challenges will be enormous. I'll train for them, Park replied simply. Whatever skills I need to learn, I'll learn them. Morrison found himself grinning despite the gravity of the situation. Specialist, 3 days ago I thought you were just a ceremonial guard who spent his time playing dress-up and marching in circles. I was wrong. You're one of the most dedicated soldiers I've ever met. Thank you, sir. But I was never just a ceremonial guard. I was doing exactly what this mission requires, standing watch against forces that want to destroy what we hold sacred. Colonel Walsh stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Virginia countryside. The mission launches in 2 weeks. That gives us time to train you in combat infiltration techniques, explosives handling, and Vex technology. Master Sergeant Morrison and his team will be your instructors. I'd be honored to work with them, ma'am. Johnson spoke up from his position by the door. Park, can I ask you something? When that weapon was tearing your mind apart, what kept you going? What was the thought that got you through it? Park was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. It wasn't a thought, sir. Thoughts can be attacked, twisted, used against you. It was something deeper than thought. It was the knowledge that every name I spoke represented someone who gave everything for their duty. As long as I could honor them by saying their names correctly, the weapon couldn't really hurt me. The room fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. Morrison had served with heroes and legends, but he'd never met anyone who had so completely subordinated their personal identity to their sense of duty. There's something else, Dr. Kim said, consulting her medical tablet. The brain scans show that your neural pathways have been permanently altered by the exposure. Your resistance to psychological stress has actually increased. It's as if the weapon tried to break you and instead made you stronger. How is that possible? Walsh asked. We think it has to do with his pre-existing mental conditioning, Dr. Kim explained. 7 years of extreme psychological discipline created neural pathways that are unusually resistant to external manipulation. When the weapon attacked those pathways, they didn't break. They adapted. Park absorbed this information with his usual calm. So I'm better equipped for the mission now than I was before the test? Significantly better, Dr. Kim confirmed. Your mind has essentially developed immunity to Vex psychological warfare. Morrison stood and extended his hand to Park. Specialist, it's been an honor serving with you, even briefly. You've changed my understanding of what it means to be a soldier. Park shook his hand firmly. The honor was mine, sir. You and your team taught me that there are many ways to serve with distinction. One by one, the other Rangers came forward to shake Park's hand. Vasquez, who had initially questioned the wisdom of using a ceremonial guard for combat operations. Chen, whose cybernetic enhancements had given him new respect for purely human forms of mental discipline. Johnson, who had learned that there were forms of courage beyond facing enemy fire. Santos, who had witnessed a demonstration of dedication that redefined her understanding of military service. As they prepared to leave, Morrison turned back to Park one final time. When you complete this mission and come home, will you go back to the tomb? Park smiled. If they'll have me, sir. The dead still need someone to stand watch over them. 2 weeks later, Specialist David Park disappeared into the dark between the stars, carrying humanity's hopes on a solo mission to destroy an alien weapon that could drive entire armies insane. The Rangers who had tested him knew that if anyone could succeed against impossible odds, it was the quiet young man who had spent 7 years proving that some things were worth any sacrifice. At Arlington National Cemetery, the eternal flame burned as it always had, and other guards took up the ancient duty of walking 21 steps, pausing for 21 seconds, and repeating the cycle in honor of those who had given everything in service of something greater than themselves. The tomb of the unknown soldier never lacked for guardians. There would always be those who understood that some duties transcended personal comfort, personal safety, and even personal survival, and somewhere in the depths of space, one of those guardians was proving that human dedication could triumph over any force that sought to break the human spirit.